Have you ever wondered why, even in a world full of suffering, the simple act of caring can bring such peace? What if the key to your own freedom isn't found in escaping pain, but in gently turning toward it with love? True compassion doesn't just soothe others, it dissolves the walls around your own heart. Because the moment you reach out, something within you is set free. Welcome to Trandy Wisdom, where every story is a compelling truth. In the teachings of the Buddha, liberation isn't found by running from the world. It is discovered by embracing it with a boundless heart. When we suffer, our instinct is to retreat, to protect, to close ourselves off. But true healing begins when we open to the sorrow of others, open to our shared humanity, open to the tender truth that we aren't separate. Compassion is not a weakness. It is the wisdom of the awakened heart, fearless, vast, and quietly transformative. And in every act of compassion, something within us lets go, and we begin to taste the freedom that cannot be bought, only lived. 1. Compassion is the essence of the enlightened mind. There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a person kneels by the side of someone in pain, without seeking praise, without needing reward. That moment, small and often unnoticed, is where compassion lives. And in the teachings of the Buddha, it is in that still, tender moment that the seeds of true liberation are sown. In the forest monasteries and along the dusty roads of ancient India, the Buddha walked not with grandeur, but with deep listening. He listened not only to words, but to the silent wounds people carried. A mother grieving a lost child, a man consumed by hatred, a wanderer confused by the tangle of existence. In each of them, he saw not a problem to be solved, but a heart waiting to be embraced. To the awakened mind, compassion is not a choice. It is the natural fragrance of a heart that no longer clings. Like the scent of a lotus blooming in muddy waters, it rises not in spite of suffering, but through it. Compassion is not pity. It does not look down from above. It is not a distant sorrow. True compassion steps down into the fire, sits beside suffering, and whispers, "I see you. You are not alone." This is why compassion lies at the heart of the path to awakening. Without it, the practice becomes dry, hollow, self-serving. One may know every doctrine, recite every sutra, and yet remain trapped in the fortress of self. But the moment the heart trembles at the suffering of another, not with helplessness, but with the wish to ease it, something opens. A door swings wide. The walls begin to fall. In the teachings preserved across centuries, the Buddha did not teach only mindfulness as a tool of concentration. He taught it as the foundation of presence. And through presence, we touch suffering. Through touching suffering, we birth compassion. And through compassion, the self begins to melt. The enlightened mind is not cold and detached. It is warm like sunlight through autumn leaves. It sees the world clearly, not as a place to escape, but as a field of interwoven lives, each beating with the desire to be free from pain. This is the realization that shatters the illusion of separateness. In seeing the suffering of others as not separate from our own, the heart awakens from its slumber. A bird does not need to be taught how to fly. It flies because it was born with wings. Likewise, the awakened mind does not try to be compassionate. It simply is. Compassion flows from it, like breath, gentle, effortless, without calculation. It embraces the criminal and the saint, the rich and the poor, the wounded and the one who wounds. This kind of love is not born of sentiment. It is born of deep understanding. The Buddha once described compassion as the trembling of the heart in response to suffering, coupled with the wish to remove it. This trembling is not weakness. It is the strength of one who has ceased to resist the truth of interbeing, one who no longer turns away from the pain of the world, but walks into it with stillness. The path of awakening is not a ladder we climb upward. It is a circle we enter more deeply. And the deeper we walk, the more we are asked not to know, but to love, not to grasp truth as a possession, but to become a refuge for others. Compassion is not something we develop to earn enlightenment. It is the flowering of enlightenment itself. To feel the suffering of others is not a burden. It is the cracking of the shell of ego. When the heart breaks open, light enters. And in that light, we no longer ask, "How do I escape this world?" but, "How may I help others be free?" This is not martyrdom. It is not self-sacrifice. It is the joy of living in a way that no longer circles around the self. A monk once asked, "What is the highest form of wisdom?" The reply came not in words, but in a gesture. The teacher bent down, lifted a child who had fallen, and smiled. This is the wisdom of compassion. It speaks through hands, not just thoughts, through presence, not just intellect. In the deserts of solitude and the forests of meditation, the practitioner may touch stillness, but it is when they return to the cries of the world and meet those cries with a peaceful heart that their awakening deepens. The fire of compassion burns away pride, fear, and indifference. It reveals the truth that our liberation is bound to that of others. A wise teacher once said, "If you want to find enlightenment, go where the broken are." The enlightened mind does not float above the world. It kneels, it listens, it mends, and in doing so, it becomes light not only for itself, but for the 10,000 beings lost in night. Compassion is the essence of the enlightened mind, because it is the realization that there is no enlightened self apart from others. There is no separate I to be saved. In truth, the very idea of liberation transforms when touched by compassion. It becomes not escape, but embrace, not distance, but intimacy. It becomes the act of becoming one with life as it is, with all its sorrow, all its messiness, and all its beauty. When the Buddha looked upon the world, he did not see evil, nor fools, nor enemies. He saw suffering beings lost in illusion. And so he did not preach with anger. He spoke with gentleness, clarity, and immense love. Even when he corrected, he did so as one waking a friend from a bad dream. This is the compassion of the awakened one, not soft or sentimental, but fiercely kind. We are not asked to be perfect. We are asked to see, to pause in the rush of our own concerns and turn toward another with a steady gaze, to offer silence instead of judgment, to bow inwardly before each being, recognizing the sacred wound we all carry. This is the peace of the awakened heart. Compassion, then, is not merely a virtue. It is a gate, a sacred threshold. Those who cross it find that their own suffering begins to dissolve, not because it is ignored, but because it is held with the same tenderness offered to others. The lotus blooms in mud, not in spite of it. And so too does compassion bloom in this messy, imperfect life, not after we fix the world, but while we love it as it is. This is the first and deepest truth of the Buddha's path. To awaken is to love. To see clearly is to care deeply. To be free is to be empty of self and full of boundless compassion. And so the journey begins not in the heavens, but in the quiet choice to ease another's pain. One moment, one breath, one open heart at a time. 2. Compassion dissolves the illusion of a separate self. There is a boundary we have been taught to believe in. It is invisible yet firm, quiet yet constant. It is the belief that there is a me here and a you over there, the belief that I am inside this body and the rest of the world is outside. This illusion of separation is perhaps the deepest root of all suffering. But compassion, when practiced deeply, does not simply ease pain. It dismantles this illusion. In the hush of the early morning, before the world awakens with its usual demands, a single breath enters the body. The lungs rise, the chest expands, but where did this breath come from? Was it not the trees, the wind, the unseen aliveness of the world that gave it to you? And when you exhale, where does that breath go? Into the mouths of others, into the leaves, into the skies. Nothing is kept, nothing is held. You are breathing the same air that passed through countless beings before you. You are not apart. You are part of everything. The illusion of self is like a shadow on the wall, convincing, detailed, but empty of real substance. It is built on comparisons, on borders, on the habit of mine and yours. But compassion is a quiet rebellion. It flows beneath the cracks of ego. It whispers, there is no other. When we feel the pain of another, not as an observer, but as if it were our own, what has truly happened in that moment? The walls of the self have softened. The boundary line has blurred. The heart has leapt across the imagined divide. That is the first glimpse of liberation. The realization that we were never really separate. The Buddha taught that the self is not a fixed entity, but a flow of conditions, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, habits, interacting moment by moment, like a river. The self appears solid only from a distance, but step into it, and it slips through your fingers. There is no thing called a self, only a process. And compassion reveals this more clearly than any philosophical argument. When you touch the suffering of another deeply, when their grief moves you, when their joy warms you, when their confusion stirs your care, you are no longer confined to your own small narrative. You have stepped into their stream, and they into yours. In that sacred meeting, you begin to see, we are not two stories. We are one unfolding. A mother holding her child through illness does not ask, is this pain mine or yours? A nurse wiping the brow of a dying patient does not wonder, am I you or are you me? In these moments, identity dissolves. There is only presence. There is only love. The illusion of a separate self is rooted in fear. The fear that if we let go, we will disappear. That if we do not define ourselves, we will be nothing. But compassion shows us the opposite. When we let go, we become vast. When we stop defending the ego, we become available to life. This is why the practice of compassion is not merely moral. It is transformative. It is a path of insight. Because in every act of genuine compassion, the self is loosened. It no longer clings so tightly. It no longer insists on its separateness. And in that loosening, freedom begins. In the teachings of the ancients, there is a recurring image, the boundless sky. Thoughts come and go like clouds, but the sky remains open, untouched. The self is like the clouds, passing, shifting, illusory. Compassion is the wind that clears the sky. To practice compassion is to turn towards suffering, not to fix it, but to be with it, to hold it in the cradle of our awareness. And when we do, we begin to see that the suffering of another is not fundamentally different from our own. Their longing to be understood is our longing. Their fear is our fear. Their desire for peace is the same flame we have nursed quietly in the dark. In that moment, the distinction between self and other crumbles like sand under water. This is not mystical. It is utterly human. It happens in small ways. When you listen without interrupting, when you forgive without demand, when you stay even though it hurts to stay. Compassion is not a strategy. It is not a way to improve ourselves or appear kind. It is the natural flowering of awareness. When we are truly present, compassion arises on its own, like the moon rising when the sky grows dark. You do not have to force it. You only have to remove the veil. And what is the veil? The belief that I am separate, alone, disconnected. This belief is heavy. It isolates. It breeds suffering. But it is not true. Look closely. Your body is composed of food, water, sunlight, none of which came from you. Your thoughts are shaped by the words of others, the teachings you've heard, the books you've read. Your emotions rise and fall like tides in a sea stirred by winds you cannot control. What part of you is truly independent? Even your suffering is not yours alone. It echoes through generations. It reflects systems, histories, wounds passed down like heirlooms. To see this is not to despair. It is to be humble. It is to remember. We suffer together, and we heal together. The practice of compassion is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming no one. It is about becoming so empty of self that the pain of another has room to enter, and so full of awareness that it is held with gentle hands. To dissolve the illusion of a separate self is not to lose identity. It is to gain intimacy with all things. The tree is no longer just a tree. It is your breath. The stranger is no longer just another person. They are your mirror. The enemy is no longer other. They are your teacher in disguise. And when the self dissolves, what remains? Not void, not absence. What remains is openness. What remains is a heart vast enough to hold the world. This is the fruit of compassion. Not only that others are healed, but that we ourselves are freed. Freed from the armor of ego. Freed from the prison of I and mine. Freed to love without condition. To act without calculation. To live without fear. The rivers do not ask where they are going. The sun does not demand gratitude for rising. The tree does not withhold its fruit. Nature gives, because it is in its nature to give. The awakened heart does the same. It offers compassion not as a gift, but as a return to its true nature. So when you sit with your breath and feel it soften, remember that this breath isn't yours. It was given, and so is your life. What will you do with it? Let compassion be your answer, not as duty, but as freedom, not as an escape from the world, but as a full embrace of it. The more you love, the less you cling. The less you cling, the more you see. And the more you see, the more love flows through you, until the illusion of you fades like mist at dawn. And what remains? Only this, a vast and quiet heart, resting in the truth that there never was a separate self to protect, only a boundless presence, pulsing with love. 3. Compassion is wisdom in action. A raindrop does not need a map to know where to fall. It simply follows gravity, surrendering to the natural order, nourishing whatever it touches. True compassion flows in the same way. It does not calculate. It does not ask, is this person worthy of my care? It simply responds, because it understands. In the Buddhist path, wisdom is not something we store on a shelf or recite it from sacred texts. It is something lived fully, silently, and often invisibly. And when wisdom matures, it begins to move. That movement, when shaped by understanding, becomes compassion. There are many who think wisdom is cold, like a mountain watching from afar. But true wisdom is warm. It comes down from the mountain, crosses rivers, and walks into villages where people weep. It sits beside sorrow and holds it without judgment. It offers its presence without pride. It touches life not with the hand of authority, but with the hand of service. Compassion is not separate from wisdom. It is the face that wisdom wears when it reaches the world. We often imagine compassion as a feeling, a soft stirring of the heart when we see someone in pain. But this is only the beginning. Real compassion is not just the tremble in the chest. It is what we do with that trembling. It is the action that follows the understanding. A hand extended, a silence offered, a boundary moved, a life changed. The Buddha did not teach from a throne. He walked among the sick. He consoled the grieving. He listened to those cast aside by society. His wisdom was not distant. It was intimate. It met the brokenness of the world without turning away. It flowed into kindness, clarity, and deep, courageous presence. And this is the heart of Buddhist practice, that to see clearly is to care deeply. When we understand the roots of suffering, not only in ourselves, but in others, our response cannot be indifference. It must become compassion. And when that compassion acts, it becomes a force of transformation. Wisdom isn't complete until it moves through the body, until it moves through our words, our gestures, our decisions. The understanding of impermanence is not just a philosophical truth. It becomes compassion when we hold the dying with gentleness. The insight of no self becomes compassion when we stop defending the ego and begin listening to another's truth. The realization of interbeing becomes compassion when we protect the forest, not as a resource, but as part of our own breath. There is a moment when someone chooses not to strike back, when they listen instead of shout, when they wait instead of judge. These moments may go unnoticed in the noise of the world, but they are where wisdom is most alive. Compassion may not always change the world in an instant, but it always changes something. It softens the space. It seeds a new possibility. It reminds someone they are not alone. To act compassionately is not to act sentimentally. It is to act from clarity. Clarity that knows anger cannot cure hatred, that punishment cannot end fear, that violence cannot make peace. This clarity is not passive. It is not naive. It is deeply rooted, like a tree that bends but does not break. It can hold both joy and injustice. It can smile in the storm, not because it ignores pain, but because it knows how to walk through it with love. A compassionate action does not always look grand. Sometimes it is just being fully present while someone weeps. Sometimes it is saying no with kindness. Sometimes it is choosing the slower path, the less efficient one, because it causes less harm. These are not acts of weakness. They are expressions of wisdom that sees beyond short-term gain. They are the patient hands of one who understands what truly matters. In Buddhist tradition, the ideal of the bodhisattva, the awakened being who vows to help all others, is not a myth to admire, but a mirror to hold up to ourselves. The bodhisattva walks not to escape the world, but to embrace it. Their path is not about accumulating spiritual experiences, but about dissolving the boundary between knowledge and love. Compassion, when guided by wisdom, becomes fearless. It steps into places most avoid. It forgives when it's not deserved. It reaches out when others retreat. And it keeps giving, not from obligation, but because it cannot help but give, like the sun. It does not ask who is worthy of its warmth. It simply shines. This kind of action does not come from ego. It comes from emptiness, not emptiness as void, but as vastness. Emptiness that is free of clinging, of self-centeredness. From this space, we act not to fix, not to be admired, not to control, but to serve. And in that service, both self and other are transformed. In the forest, a bird sings though no one may hear. The song is not for applause. It is simply the expression of its being. In the same way, compassionate action is the natural song of a wise heart. It doesn't need recognition. It does not need reward. Its joy is in the giving. Yet this does not mean compassion is easy. To act with compassion often means to stand where others turn away. It means to feel more, not less. To be pierced by suffering and still remain open. To weep and yet to keep walking. But those who live in this way do not grow weary in the same way others do, because they are not drawing from a limited self. They are drawing from the deep well of interbeing. Every time you choose to listen without defensiveness, to offer a word of kindness, to act from your deepest understanding, you are becoming a vehicle of wisdom in the world. You are not waiting for enlightenment, you are living it. To embody compassion is to become the bridge between the silence of insight and the noise of the world. It is to bring the stillness of the cushion into the kitchen, the marketplace, the places where real life unfolds. It is to make the teachings real, not just for yourself, but for those who may never read a sutra, who may never enter a temple, but who will feel the presence of your heart. The world does not need more perfect people. It needs people whose wisdom moves, whose care becomes action, whose practice does not stay locked in the self. To be wise is not enough. We must love, and to love is not enough. We must act. Let your understanding walk. Let it touch the world. Let it feed the hungry, listen to the lonely, and protect the vulnerable. Let it choose words that heal and hands that do no harm. This is how wisdom takes form in the world, not as doctrine, but as compassion in motion. 4. How compassion leads to liberation. There is a hidden gate inside every act of compassion. At first, we may not see it. We believe we are reaching outward, to comfort, to help, to heal someone else. But as we move closer to another's pain, something unexpected happens. The boundaries we once clung to begin to dissolve. The hand that reaches out begins to soften the very bars of its own prison. This is how compassion leads to liberation, not by fixing the world, but by transforming the heart that sees it. We live much of our lives locked inside invisible walls. The wall of fear, the wall of judgment, the wall of I am not enough, or I must protect myself. These walls are built brick by brick, thought by thought, memory by memory, and we believe them to be real. We live behind them, peering out at others through the narrow windows of self-interest and suspicion. But compassion opens a door. When we truly see the suffering of another, when we stop running, stop analyzing, stop needing to be right, and simply sit with that pain, we are no longer the same. Something within us cracks open. A new space is created, spacious, tender, quiet. That space is the beginning of freedom, because in that moment, the self, the small self, obsessed with its survival and success, begins to loosen. It gives way to something more vast, something without borders. And that vastness is liberation. Liberation is often misunderstood. We imagine it as an escape, as a leaving behind of suffering, of the world, of all the burdens of life. But the Buddhist path teaches something far more subtle. True liberation is not about escape. It is about intimacy. It is about entering life so fully, so deeply, that the illusion of separation falls away. Compassion is the path that takes us there. When we open to the pain of others, we are not just being kind. We are stepping into the truth of interbeing. We are experiencing in the body and breath that there is no other to help, only the shared pain of one great body, beating across time and space. A child crying in a refugee camp, a widow sitting alone in a quiet kitchen, a man lost in the maze of his own anger. These are not strangers. They are not objects of our charity. They are mirrors, showing us the parts of ourselves we have forgotten, abandoned, or rejected. To love them is to return home. But this return is not sentimental. It is fierce. It requires that we shed our armor, that we let go of the narratives that keep us safe, superior, or separate. Compassion demands that we feel fully, that we allow sorrow to touch us without turning away, that we recognize this suffering is not yours or mine. It is ours. And in this recognition, the self begins to dissolve. This is why compassion is so powerful, because it strikes at the very root of delusion, the belief in a separate, independent self that must always defend, acquire, and control. When that belief is challenged by love, it begins to fade like mist at sunrise. Suddenly, we no longer ask, "How do I get free?" We begin to ask, "How can I help?" And in that shift, something extraordinary occurs. We find ourselves free already, not because suffering has vanished, but because we are no longer resisting it, no longer afraid of it. We are resting in the stream of life itself, flowing with it instead of against it. In the sutras, the Buddha often spoke of the 8 winds: gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disgrace, pleasure and pain. Most of us are blown around by these winds our entire lives. We chase what we desire. We run from what we fear. We build identities around fleeting conditions, and in doing so, we suffer. But compassion grounds us. It is the deep root that holds firm when the winds howl, not because it protects us from the storms, but because it connects us to something deeper than the storm, the soil of the present moment, the truth of interconnection. When you care for another, not from guilt, not from ego, but from a clear and quiet love, you are not losing yourself. You are finding the self that was never separate to begin with. You are touching the liberation that arises when there is nothing left to defend. This is why so many great teachers, when asked how to awaken, offer simple answers: serve, listen, be present with those in pain. Because these are not just good deeds, they are doorways into freedom. Each time you set aside your agenda to listen to someone's fear, you loosen the grip of self. Each time you forgive when you could punish, you choose spaciousness over contraction. Each time you walk toward suffering instead of away from it, you awaken a part of yourself that remembers, this is not a stranger. This is your own heart, wearing a different face. Compassion does not ignore pain. It embraces it, so that pain can be held with love. And in that embrace, something ancient begins to unravel. The tight knot of me and mine, of win and lose, of fight and flee. And what remains? Not a blankness, not a void. What remains is clarity, stillness, the knowing that comes not from thinking, but from being. You see the suffering in others, and you do not flinch. You see your own fear, and you do not turn away. You become a place where suffering can rest, not because you are stronger than it, but because you are no longer separate from it. This is the liberation compassion brings. It is not dramatic. It is not always visible, but it is real. It is felt in the way you soften your voice when speaking to a frightened child, in the way you choose patience when you are tired, in the way you return, again and again, to presence, even when the world pulls you toward distraction. Each of these moments is a crack in the wall of ego. Each is a small death of the illusion of separation, and each is a birth of true freedom. So when you feel overwhelmed by the suffering in the world, do not despair. Let that pain wake you. Let it call you deeper into the heart of compassion, not as a burden, but as a path. Because this is the paradox. The more we open to the suffering of others, the less trapped we become in our own, not because we are avoiding it, but because we are dissolving the illusion that it was ever ours alone. We were never meant to walk this path alone, and in truth, we never have. Every act of compassion, offered or received, is a step toward remembering this. Liberation is not a distant goal. It is the quiet freedom born in the moment we love, without holding back. The moment we bow, not in defeat, but in reverence, to the sacred pain that connects us all. The moment we choose, again and again, to let compassion lead,